Welcome everyone. This is Mishnah in Depth, Masechet Ketubot with Rabbanit Leah Sarna. This is the third session of 8 sessions, and we're glad to have you back. This class is a project of Drisha's Rivka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored by her family in her memory. For those just joining in, this class is designed to accompany independent daily study of the Mishnah following the Mishnah Yomit schedule, meeting weekly as a community of learners to augment independent study, enhance our understanding of the mishnayot learned, and support each other as a community of learners. Rabbanit Leah Sarna is a member of Drisha's staff. She is our director of teen programs, and as this is hopefully not the first time you've learned with her, I'm going to keep the bio short. All I ask is one quick housekeeping note, is if you are joining in to please mute yourself unless you're directly asking questions or talking. But your questions are very much welcomed, whether you're on Facebook or on Zoom. Please do ask questions in chat. If you want to become a panelist, I'll be sending out those invitations periodically. You can unmute yourself, ask questions directly, and it's also a great way to see your face if you're in a place where you can turn your camera on. Source sheets will be posted in both chats, and happy learning.
All right, hi everyone, welcome back. So as usual, I'm going to share my screen, which means I can't necessarily know who's speaking when you or see people who are like raising their hands. So definitely just interrupt, and I'll let you know if it's not the right moment yet. And also, if you put stuff into the chat, Kayla is going to be minding that, and she'll interrupt me if there are questions that are coming in there or on Facebook. Okay, so we are now this week, for the first time, we're talking about 2 chapters together. So we're doing 3 and 4 together, because today I think is the end of 4. I don't learn it on the day. So I thought we would fully sort of catch up with the schedule, and if we were to continue 1 chapter at a time, we would find ourselves in trouble. So that is what we'll be doing, just talking about some themes from chapters 3 and 4. Last week, I think I described the class as something of like a tasting menu. So we'll be doing that again. This week, Ketubot, there's always some difficulty in the subject matter, but maybe a little bit less this week than in the previous session. So hopefully that will also maybe leave class in a less dark place than we sometimes have in this class before. So all of that by way of sort of teeing it up. So let me share my screen. And the first topic that I want to talk about is another one of these topics. Like last week, we did Pesha Asar, Pesha Hetir, the mouth that made something prohibited is the same mouth that made something permitted. And we said then, like, you could spend a year studying that subject. So now we're doing another one of these like year subjects, and it is Kimle V'derabamine. So he receives the greater punishment. That's kind of the translation that Koran uses for it, which I don't totally love. Like, we uphold it with the bigger one of it, is maybe the more literal translation, which also doesn't really help. So what is a Kimle V'derabamine? That's the question that we're going to be diving into. But the cases where Kimle V'derabamine is a relevant principle are cases where someone might be liable for more than one punishment. So in American law, we see this all the time. He was indicted on 12 different charges and got 6 years for that and 12 years for the other and 15 years for the next, and then had to pay a fine of $12 gazillion. Like, we see that in the news every day. It feels very normal to us. But in fact, in halakha, in that situation, we would apply the principle of Kimle V'derabamine, and that person would only get one of those punishments, and they would only get the biggest one of them. And if we didn't apply the Kimle V'derabamine, because there are exceptions, some of which are like Ketubot based exceptions, then we would at least have to explain why. So in Torah law, it is not the norm to have 8 counts of this and 7 counts of the other and 12 years and a fine. Like that would be very, very, very unusual in Torah law. And every time that you would have something like that, the Gemara would push you to explain why you think that's okay, as opposed to applying the rule of Kimle B'Dravmine, which is that you only get the biggest of the punishments. So I want us to see it we'll see it in the psukim that we're talking about, and then in which the ones we've been talking about this whole time so far, basically in Motzi Shemra, and then we will see it in the mishnayot of Ketubot chapter 3, which is one of the kind of main locuses. Like if you were learning Ketubot chapter 3 in the Gemara, you would be spending your entire time talking about Kimle V'Dravmine, which we are not going to do here, but we'll see it in the Mishnah. We'll see the Mishnah introduce the concept, and then we'll just look at 3 Makorot that shed some light on like, what is Kimle B'Dravmine about? So we'll look at a Rashi, and then we'll look at a Gemara that clearly complicates the Rashi, and then we're going to look at a modern day scholar, actually Shimon Shimoni, and Drisha. He's a teacher at Yeshivat Har Tzion, but in the Drisha world, he is famous for his wife, Rabbanit Yael Shimoni, who is the assistant Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Drisha in Israel. So he's basically a Drisha Rebbetz's man, but he had a good idea about Kimle V'Dravmine that I'm excited to share with you. And hopefully someone will pass this recording along to the Shimoni family and they will laugh. Okay, so let's begin here. So just to review, we've seen these psukim, I think, every single class so far, but why not again? So we're in Devarim 22. So if right, Kimatei Ish, oh sorry, this is not, I said this wrong. This is the situation of Nara. We're gonna get to Motzi Shemra soon, but this is not it. That's not where we're starting. We're starting with rape. So Kimatei Ish Na'ara V'Tula Asher Lo Orasa. So if a man comes along upon a virgin who is not engaged, the tafsa v'shachavima, and he seizes her and he lies with her, v'nimtza'u, and they are discovered. V'natana isha shuchivima la'avia dara chamishim kasef. So he pays a fine to dad of 50 silver pieces. V'lo tiyeh le'isha tachad asher ina, and she marries him, and because he raped her, lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav, he can never have the right to divorce her. Okay, so the Mishnah in the beginning of Ketubot 3 is talking about this fine. He pays a fine, the rapist pays a fine to the woman's father. And so in a lot of cases, we have a fine. This fine applies very broadly. Elu na'arot sheyesh lahem knas. These are the young women for whom there is a fine paid to their fathers. And it's even, not your like most straightforward young women, even the mamzeret, even the woman, the girl, the young woman who is the result of an illegal relationship, even the Nitzina, the Gibeonite women. We can talk about who Nitzinim are another time, even the Samaritan women, even the convert, the captive, the maid servant, etc. They all are, you pay the fine to the father in all of these different cases. And in fact, even in cases of incest, you pay the fine. So a Baal Achuto, someone who rapes his sister, God forbid. I mean, all of these cases are God forbid. I don't know why that feels especially different. If he rapes his aunt, different kinds of aunts.
Who do you pay the fine to? Excuse me. Who do you pay the fine to in case of incest?
Your own father. Yes, Good question. Wild. But because, right, like if your father was going to marry off your sister as a virgin and now maybe you can't or something like that. I mean, the wild thing is in these cases, you don't marry them, but you still pay the fine, right? It's not the case that if you wanted to marry your sister, all you have to do is rape her and then you're golden, right? God forbid. God forbid to everything. But it is the case that you still pay the fine. So why is that, right? Because when you think the principle of Kimli b'Dramine would apply, because there's bigger prohibitions involved in raping your sister, but the Mishnah says no. In these cases, yesh lahen knas, there's still a fine paid. Even though the punishment for these is karet, because in Behamizat Beitin, because there's no court-imposed capital punishment here, the court can then still impose the fine. So there's so in this case, right, just as we're trying to excavate, what is Kimlei B'Drabmine? Well, Kimlei B'Drabmine is a rule that applies to courts. It's not necessarily a rule that applies to the case itself. So if in the case itself, and we'll see more of this, we'll see this even the other way later, but if in the case itself, the court is applying a fine and God is applying the maybe like corporal punishment, then because Kimlei B'Drabmine only applies to the court, the court can still apply the fine, and then God takes care of the capital punishment in this case. But there are some that there's no fine. So if you okay, so these are all, right? Abala Gioret, Ala Shvuya, Ala Shifcha, Shniftu, Vishnigairu. So these cases, there's no fine, not because of Kimlei B'Drabmine, but because they're unfortunately assumed, or whatever, maybe we can say it's neutral, but they're assumed to not be virgins. So anyone who's assumed to not be a virgin, the fine is associated with the virginity. So if a convert or a captive or a Gentile maidservant who had been redeemed, converted, emancipated, you're still doing something wrong. You shouldn't rape those people, but you don't pay the fine to the father. And Rabbi Yehuda says, and just because we're always thinking about the captives, as we're reading this, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Rabbi Yehuda here, and we talked about this last week, about all the assumptions about the shvuya. Rabbi Yehuda here has a minority opinion, which is shvuya shenifdeit, a captive woman who was redeemed. Harehi b'kedushata alfa pisha gadla. She is assumed to be in her state of sanctity, i.e. virginity, even though she grew up, even though she is an adult. And so you can't assume that she's not a virgin, says Rabbi Yehuda, which is most likely not the opinion that we follow, but it's an opinion that our texts maintain, so that's very important.
It's interesting. It's interesting, yes. Isn't it, that the Gioret is assumed to be a virgin.
She is not assumed to be a virgin.
Which is not, no, but in the first Mishnah, no, the Gioret, isn't she?
It's because she converted when she was younger than 3 years old and 1 day.
Oh, otherwise she would not be assumed to be a Tula.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't say it out carefully when we were going. I've been rushing through it. Yeah.
The Mishnah doesn't say that, but presumably you're learning that from the Gemara.
No, the Mishnah, I highlighted it here. The Mishnah says she's younger. In Mishnah
Gioret doesn't say that about the Gioret, that she was that young.
Abala Gioret, Ala Shvuya, Ala Shifcha, Shniftu, Vishnigairu, Vishnishtacharu.
I'm sorry, you're right.
So that clearly applies to people Shani Gairu, right?
Okay, so this gives this justifies then the halachic policy to treat a Gioret as a non-virgin. This Mishnah.
Or it's I don't know, justifies, it's consistent. It's consistent with that, yes. Okay, but here's where I wanted to get to. So haba al bito, there's more incest, I'm sorry. Haba al bito, val bat bito, val bat bino. So someone who rapes their daughter or their granddaughter from their daughter, or their granddaughter for their son, or the daughter of their wife, etc. So those people actually, ein lahem knas, they do not have a fine, not because they're assumed to not be virgins, which we had in the previous in the previous bit, but here but here we have a case where this rape incest is punishable by mitat beit din, and thereby by death in the court, and therefore the rules of kimlei b'drabamine do apply to him. So mitato b'yedei beit din v'kol michayev b'nafsho in mishalim mamon. So the Mishnah here does not use the term kimlei b'drabamine, which makes sense. It's an Aramaic term. The Mishnah doesn't know it, but the Gemara is going to just translate this idea. Kol hamichayev b'nafsho in mishalim mamon. Anyone who is liable to death does not, or anyone who owes his soul, but is liable to death, in mishalim mamon does not pay money. So where does that come from? Shnamar v'lo ya'ason anosh ye'anesh. And yet no harm follow, he shall be punished. So let's look at where that's coming from. So that's Exodus 21.
Excuse me, isn't it also possible because the money would go to him in this specific case?
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. It wouldn't necessarily, not if it's his granddaughter, for example.
Okay.
So only the first of these cases would the money go to him. But yeah, that's a great point. So like, I actually wonder, I bet the Gemara says that. I don't remember offhand if the Gemara makes that point, but I bet they do, because I mean, well, insofar as anything about the rape of, your family members is wonderful, that is a wonderful point. Yes. But the other cases, right? So if it's your son's daughter, then you would pay the fine. Theoretically, you would pay the fine to your son, but you wouldn't, because you would get mitat beit din, and that through kimlei b'drabamine would supersede the payment of any fine. And so they're learning that out from these verses in Exodus 21. So let's take a look at those in source number 3. So this is these are the main psukim that they're like the home to Judaism's discussion about abortion, strangely enough, and different interpretations of these psukim lead to wildly different understandings about what counts as death, and what counts as murder, and all those things, but we're not really here to talk about any of that. That's not how the Mishnah is using it. Okay, so just to read it, right? So two people are fighting, let's say people are fighting. So one of them hit a pregnant person and she miscarries. V'lo yihya ason. So there's different ways of interpreting this exact phrase, and all of the debates about abortion basically turn on how you interpret it. So the typical way is to interpret it as the woman miscarries, but the pregnant woman, or formerly pregnant woman, doesn't die. So the ason would be the tragedy would be her death. And because she's still alive, you end up in a monetary dispute over the damages. So that's like the typical way that Jewish sources have interpreted this source, which is to say she miscarried, but the pregnant woman or the miscarrying woman didn't die. So in that case, you have a monetary dispute. But if the woman did die, then we are not talking about a monetary dispute. We're not talking about damages. We are talking about a capital crime. So what you might think, right, the Havamina would be, hold on, just because she died doesn't mean she wasn't also damaged. Shouldn't we pursue a criminal case and a monetary case? But what they learned from the Torah here is like, no, once there's a criminal case, there is no monetary case. So that's what gets quoted here. Shneimar, right? So kol mechayev benafsho in mishalim mamun, anyone who is liable for death does not pay money, and they learn it out from here. Shneimar v'lo ya'asona noshe anish, right? That's our first pasuk here. If there's no capital, if there's no death, if there's no death happened at all, lo yasun, or no, the pregnant woman did not die, then anoshe anesh, then we're in a monetary dispute. But if there is an asun, then you're not in a monetary dispute. So it's a binary. It's one or the other. It cannot be both. Okay, so as I mentioned, Kimle Vidravmine comes up all over Shas, and if we were sitting here learning the third paragraph of Ketubot very slowly, we would be really everywhere. And one of the places we would find ourselves in is Bava Metzia 91. And here we see Rashi, and Rashi here is going into the whole case about like payment for prostitutes and whatever. And I cut out all of the details, but this is one of the key places where Rashi gives an idea about Kimle Vidramine, kind of two ideas actually. So he says, first of all, Alma afil b'makom nami ramu tashlumin alaya, even in a case where someone gets a capital punishment, the monetary obligation is actually still upon them, says Rashi. Ela she'ein koach le'unsho b'shtayim. But the Beit Din does not have the power to give one person two punishments. So really, does the person deserve two punishments? Like, let's say, to go back to this case, right? People were fighting, a pregnant woman got in the way, she miscarries, and then she dies. Is the person who pushed the pregnant woman liable both for the damages of the miscarriage and for her death? Yes, of course they are. A horrible thing happened, and then another even more horrible thing happened. But the Beit Din has to choose. The Beit Din is not empowered to grant more than one punishment. But, says Rashi, aval yedei shamayim lo yatsa ad sheyeshalim. But actually, the truth of the matter is that on a Dinei Shamayim level, in the heavenly court of justice, just getting the death penalty in this situation, according to Rashi, is actually insufficient. And really, this person owes money to the family of the deceased woman as well. So that's what the first thing that Rashi says. And Rashi says, and the next thing, which is even also very interesting idea in Dinei Shamayim, which is sort of this like interesting idea that, and very relatable idea, which is that human courts are sort of necessarily limited in all different ways. And in the case of Kimle Vidramine, it seems like human courts are limited just by like rules that govern human courts. But there's other ways in which human courts are limited, because of like limitations on humans and our ability to perceive and know things. And so it's very, I really like it that the Talmud has this strong sense that like, okay, but beyond the limitations of human courts, there are heavenly courts that dole out perfect justice. But then there's the question of like, well, what is the power of heavenly courts in this world? So like, okay, someone gets curry, right? So then we kind of have a sense like this person is liable for a death penalty that's going to be dealt out to them by God. But what does it mean to like owe money in a heavenly court? Like like how does that divine justice play out? And maybe we really believe that it does. This person's gonna lose money in the stock market or something like that, and it'll end up in the magically somehow end up in the pocket of the person they owe it to. Not magically, like God will direct it into the pocket of the person they somehow owe it to, or the person who's owed money will like win the lottery or something like that. We could assume all those things. But Rashi goes on here to say that actually money owed in divine court could be collected by the person to whom it is owned, potentially by force, to a person to whom it is owed, potentially by force. So he says, Inami itafis lo mafkina minai. So the person who's owed the money, if they just go and take it from the guy who wronged them, the human courts say, okay, keep it. So the human court can't, meaning in a case of a kimle b'd'Rabbanan, where the human court says, okay, we're prioritizing the capital punishment over the monetary fine. Okay. But the person to whom that fine should have gone can like break into the guy's house and take it from them, and the human court doesn't then prosecute that person, says Rashi, which is very interesting. So like it one way it feels like, oh, he won the lottery, that's God kind of like meting out reward or fines or whatever where it's due. But a totally different way is to imagine it sort of being in the hands of people themselves to carry out a communal understanding of divine will, which feels very, very different. Okay, so what this Rashi is all, and he says, Kach shamati mipi moria zaken. This is what I learned from my elder teacher, presumably one of his teachers in Germany, where Rashi trained. So the problem with this Rashi is that it makes sense in the case in which he is describing it. It might even make sense in some of our Ketubot cases, but it does not match with a statement in Ketubot 35a, Tana Debe Chizkiah. So we'll get to that in 1 second, but just to clarify, right, Rashi says it's a limitation on the court, but is the person really owed both things? Yes, absolutely. That's Rashi's opinion. Okay, so now we're going to see Tana Debe Chizkiah, which complicates that. So Rava says, so Rava says, Rava asks this question in Ketubot 35a, is there anyone who says that those who unwillingly performed a transgression, for which one is liable to receive the death penalty, is that person obligated to pay? So meaning, because it's a crime that normally would get the death penalty, but I did it by accident. So in that case, I am not going to get the death penalty. Can I be tried for dine mamno? Can you like sue me for damages at that point? Because I did the thing by accident, so I'm not liable for criminal charges. So now we're gonna say Tana Debe Chizkiah. Well, it's taught by the sages school of Chizkiah, and they quote Makah Adam and Makah Behema, which are both from Leviticus 24, and one who smites an animal shall pay for it, and one who smites a person shall die. Makah Adam, Makah Behema. Ma Makah Behema lo chilafta ba bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezi, bein b'mikavin l'she'ino mikavin, bein derech yerida l'derech aliyah liftero b'mamon al l'chayvo b'mamon. Right. So with an animal, we actually don't have all of these intense distinctions that we have about humans. So if you smite an animal, we don't distinguish between you did it on purpose, you did it by accident, intention, downward motion and upward motion, all these things. No, they're all in all these cases, you're not exempt. You pay money no matter what. So he says, "Af Makah Adam lo tachlok bo bein b'shogeg bein b'mezi bein mikavin l'shein mikavin bein derech yerida derech aliyah l'chayvo b'mamon ela leflatro b'mamon." So too with people, that no matter what the situation, they are never obligated, no matter what the situation in which they killed a person, they are categorically never obligated in a monetary payment. So Rashi would have said, Azoi, right? Like it's all about the Beit Din's ability to enact a punishment. So you killed by accident, great, you don't get the capital punishment. So the Beit Din still, has they get one card and they still have their one card, so they can play it, and they should be able to collect monetary fines, monetary damages. But here we see in the Gemara that is not the case, according to Tana Debe Chizkiah. He says, no, in this case, that he's talking about accidental killing, it doesn't matter. You either get the death penalty or you don't get the death penalty, but you are categorically, says Tanrei Chizkiah, you are categorically exempt from payment. There is no such thing as dine mamono in a murder case, even if the guy gets off. Which is so fascinating because in America that happens all the time. You got off on criminal charges and you can still get sued with a lower evidentiary standard and all sorts of other things. I'm sure there's a lawyer on here who can chime in. But people sometimes succeed in suing for monetary damages even when they do not succeed in criminal cases. Yeah, go for it.
One comment that came in from chat while you were talking from Debbie Sondenheim.
Yes.
Perhaps we expect that the justice needed will occur in our time on earth, but time is not linear for Hashem. Maybe the money will be given to the man's grandchildren.
Totally, 100%. Okay, so let's look at what our Shmuel Shimoni has to say about this, our Drisha Rebbitzin. And so he writes about the Tana Debei Rav Chizkiah idea, and he says, it seems that according to the perspective of Tana Debei Rav Chizkiah, you have to look at Kimlei B'Drabminei from a totally different perspective. Din Kimlei B'Drabminei Omer Shelepu'ula Ba'alat Chumra Gvoha HaMechayevet Mita. So Kimlei B'Drabminei says that in a situation that's very severe, like a case of murder, Yesh Hagdara Echad Bilvad, there's only one kind of definition of the case at hand. Ma'aseh hayeri shel ha'adam she'ara b'chavero, the action of shooting by a person who shot at his fellow. B'toch kach karach chutzato. Let's say, right, I, God forbid, shot someone in the chest. And by the way, I also tore their shirt on the way to shooting them in the heart. That situation is not defined as, you're not going to see the news headline, Rabbanit Leah killed someone and tore his shirt, right? You would never, that's not how we would talk about that situation. He says, El Kamasei Ratzach Bilvad. The headline is just, Rabbanit Leah killed someone. Shekin Humrat haratzach ma'afila al kol aspect acher shel ha'ma'aseh. Right, the severity of the murder kind of darkens everything around it. Like you don't see any of the other details that might have been relevant in a different type of case in the murder trial. Since that's the case, so since that's the case, actually the monetary obligation, says Rav Shimoni, was never even created. It never even came into being. It's not the case that it exists like Rashi describes in like the world of truth and God will exact it on God's timetable. No, the monetary case never came into being because the ripping of the shirt is so secondary to the murder that it's as if it just doesn't exist and my obligations around it never were formed. There was just never here an action that obligated monetary obligations. The whole thing hangs on the severity of the whole situation, and so the only thing that we are judging in all cases where there's a Kimlei B'Drabminei conversation, what we're doing is we're saying, let's look at the severity of the entire case, and the things that just don't reach that level of severity drop away. And so what that means is that in a murder case, like the case we were just looking at in Ketubot 35a, right, we have a murder case, but I actually can't get the death penalty because it was an accidental murder. But like the tearing of the guy's shirt still doesn't matter relative to the fact that the guy is dead. And so the case that we're arguing about is, am I liable for his death or not? Not, oh, am I liable for his death and for the fact that his shirt tore? Like no one cares about the shirt. That's the way Rav Shimoni is reading Kimlei B'Drabminei. completely opposed to Rashi, but at the end of the day, like Rashi doesn't square his writing in Bava Metzia, he doesn't square it with this case in Ketubot 35a. So it leaves open a totally different potential perspective on Kimlei B'Derab. Okay, so just to recap on Kimlei B'Derab and then move over to something completely different. So to recap on Kimlei B'Derab, it's quite complicated. It seems like there are cases that exist in the world where one might have to pay and face a crime, but those are unique cases. And our case in Ketubot of the rape cases, when there is a death sentence in human courts, even a fine that is laid out by the Torah, not just that there is a fine, but exactly how much it is, even that fine can also be kind of that fine also falls away under the principle of Kimlei B'Derab. It's such a deep Torah-based principle, and we saw one of the places that it gets drawn to. In Mako, they bring even a different Torah hook for Kimlei B'Derab. And whenever that happens in the Gemara, you have to ask, like, if Kimlei B'Derab is learned out from more than one place, does that actually weaken it because we're just reading it into the Torah in all these different places? Or does it strengthen it because we're seeing that Kimlei B'Derab is a principle that the Torah just assumes all over the place, so much so that in cases like rape, the Torah doesn't spell out, he has to pay a fine unless he gets mitat beitin. We should just assume that the Torah knows that we know that he doesn't pay the fine if he is also liable in mitat beitin. And so it seems like Kimlei B'Derab is this like deep and very powerful and present all over Shas principle about how Jewish law, how the Jewish legal system works and is applied. Okay, now we're gonna completely change topics. So in chapter 4, we saw this case of we're talking now about the zona. So now we're back in the Motzi Shemra, but what if it's not Motzi Shemra? And actually, here's our case. It's not Motzi Shemra because she actually did it, right? So even met hadavar hazav velodim tu v'tuim lanara. So the husband claims my wife wasn't a virgin, and that turns out to be true. So then what do? Hotziu et hanara al patach beit haviha. You bring, unfortunately, the girl to the entrance of her father's house. Uskalua and she'ira b'avanim v'mita, and then they stone her. Ki asta nevala b'Yisrael was a note beit avia, because so she's a zona. She is a woman who fornicated. She fornicated under her father's authority, so she gets stoned in his house. Uviarta harami kirbacha, and thus you will sweep away evil from your midst. So we're back here, and so here's what we see is that what the Mishnah starts to be interested in. Well, it seems like there's a lot of like dad playing into this situation. So what if she's a convert and therefore like doesn't 100% have a relationship with dad necessarily? Okay. So we start out with the following example. Hagioret shenitz gaira v'ta ima. So the mom convert whose daughter converted with her, and the daughter converted with her when she is younger than 3. This is what Gershom was asking about this at the beginning, right? So then we assume she's the baby girl convert is assumed to still be a virgin. And so then if she zinta, like she sleeps around and is found out, then if she sleeps around while she's engaged and she is found out, then she does not get skila, the way that she doesn't get stoned the way that a girl who had never converted would, but she does get chanek. She does get killed just by a different method, strangulation. Because the other things that apply to her that are interesting is she gets killed, but she doesn't have a petach beit aviyah because she's a convert. So she doesn't have the entrance to her father's home, doesn't even exist for her, which is why, so she gets a different kind of death penalty altogether. And also, if the Motzi Shemra was lying, she also doesn't get the 100, she doesn't get the fine. But her husband does have to stay married to her. Okay, so that's kind of all just to lay it out. But here's the case that I'm very interested in. So the daughter's conception occurred while her mother was not yet Jewish, but her birth took place while she was Jewish. So this is a thing that halakha is like very interested in, the pregnant convert, and I'm also very interested in the pregnant convert. And so what's the status of the daughter who was conceived to a non-Jewish mother, but then born, yes, to a Jewish mother. So here we start to, what?
The result.
Right. So here's where we see, is she the same as someone who converted as a baby? Or because she converted as a fetus, it's actually different. And here we start to see that it's actually different, which is really interesting, right? In terms of like fetal personhood, it's interesting that actually our assumption is, no, she was born Jewish, this fetus, even though the fetus converted, it's born Jewish such that this woman who converted as a fetus gets skila. She has a different halakha than the baby girl who converted. But because she was conceived as a non-Jew, she does not have formal Jewish fathership. So she still doesn't have petach beit av, and she doesn't collect the 100 sela. But the Mishnah just brings this case to round it out, even though it's obvious. But if the girl was conceived to a convert mother and then also born to the convert mother, then she is kabat Yisrael kol davar. Clearly, there's no conversion, like anything that happened for that baby, because the child of a convert is not themselves a convert. So all the rules kind of standardly apply. And we see where the anxiety comes out with this, right? That it's like Yisrael, that it's really seems to be so strongly, the rules of Motzi Shemra, for better or for worse, seem to be really tied up in assumptions about the like Jewish status of the girl. I just saw a chat come in. Kayla, what do I got?
From Miriam Smirnoff. What if the father was Jewish? Shouldn't the petach and sela apply in the case of the fetus who was conceived before the mother converted?
So you would think that that's a possibility for sure. But when you convert, you kind of lose your parentage. So it seems like for the fetus, when the fetus converts, it loses its like father status, but it doesn't seem to lose the mother status. There's a big debate it's more practical debate now than it ever has been in the history of the world about what constitutes Jewish motherhood. Is it like your ovum or is it your pregnancy? And because now we have, thank God, so many ways of bringing humans into the world. So the Jews who use surrogacy want to say your Jewish status comes from the ovum, and the Jews who use egg donors want to say the Jewish status comes from the pregnancy. And so how that plays out halachically is really, it's really live, because these issues are just like super duper brand new. And then also, so the fact that we don't know which one it is means maybe we do a conversion for each of those, but then then maybe it means, but can the person who did a conversion just out of like, I don't know, this is so new, we don't know what to do, can that person then marry a Kohen, or are they a real convert? Anyway, that's really big questions that profoundly affect people's lives that are being discussed like very, very actively today. And I don't think, you know, the community has fully settled on answers to those questions, even though like there have to be answers because these humans exist in the world. Babies, thank God, brought into the world through surrogacy and egg donation. We live in amazing times in that regard. So there kind of have to be answers, but there's raging debate on these exact questions. And I think that this text is kind of as close as we get to those questions of like, we normally say if you converted, then you don't have any relationship to your parentage. But in this case, well, like you're still inside your mom while you're converting. So clearly your relationship to her is pretty strong because you're like living inside her body connected by an umbilical cord. So does her parentage come through? And this Mishnah could actually go either way. So we're going to say the baby is for sure born Jewish. But does that mean that their mom is actually like their mom? But certainly, anyways, the question about dad, certainly through the conversion process, they lose their yichus to dad for sure. So that's the answer to that question. But it was like a good, it's a great question, and the ramifications and interpretations of this Mishnah and its corresponding Gemaras are very, very live.
We've got a couple more question related on this topic. Leah, you want to keep going on this?
Yeah, let's keep going, just because time is short. So the other thing that comes out is so just kind of relatedly to our pregnant while converting thing. So here's the Gemara about a Gentile woman is converting. Does the fetus, the Gemara, Rava asks, Goya Muberet Shigaira Bna In Tzarich Tefillah. So he assumes, right? The halacha is a pregnant woman who converts, then does he assumes her son does not require his own separate immersion once he comes out. And he says, why not? Amai in Tzarich Tefillah. Why does this baby not require conversion? And it seems like, and so he says, oh, maybe it's because of Rabbi Yitzchak. And Rabbi Yitzchak brings in the laws of chatzitza. So chatzitza are the laws of how, like, what can separate your body from the mikvah if you are, when you need to go to the mikvah. So the rules of chatzitza on a Torah level are if it covers most of your body, rubo, umak pidalav, and you don't want it there, then it's a Torah level separation between your body and the water. Then it's chutzitz. But rubo she'eno mak pidalav eno chutzitz. But if it's the majority of your body and you don't care about it, then maybe it's fine. So by that standard, right, the fetus is in the water. There's something between the fetus and the water. Like the fetus is not coming into contact with the mikvah waters, but the fetus wants to be surrounded by all the things that it's surrounded by, you know, it's amniotic fluid and the uterus and all the rest of mom's organs and skin and all of that. So maybe it's just technically not a chatzitza, raises the possibility. But Rav Kahana says, okay, the rules about chatzitza are talking about majority, but when it's your entire body, that it's for sure still a chatzitza, meaning if you were like going to the Dead Sea and you covered your entire body in mud, but you really want the mud there, and everyone around you is like, oh, the mud is so cool. But if it's covering literally your entire body, says Rav Kahana, then no, still on a Torah level, it would be a chatzitza. And the Gemara says, okay, but at the end of the day, shani ubar tahainu rivitei. A fetus is different. This is its natural manner of growth. So mom is not considered a chatzitza, an interposition, because this is like the natural way that the fetus is in the world. If you're a fetus and you're existing in the world, then this is how you exist. So this is also how you go to the mikvah. Ends up the Gemara here, which is just kind of like amazing. The whole discussion is just like, I think such a like wow of a discussion. But anyways, also to say, like, the Gemara is very comfortable with pregnant women going to the mikvah, and that going to the mikvah for conversion, and for that conversion, working, like being effective for the fetus. But the Shulchan Aruch says we want to know if the person going to the mikvah is pregnant or not in a conversion process. And even, you know, the note of Yehuda, which I didn't bring for you, says possibly that if the woman is pregnant, if the convert is pregnant and the Beit Din doesn't know about it, it could undermine her conversion altogether, which is a really strong opinion that we are worried about today. And so what the Shulchan Aruch says is, if you have someone who wants to convert, so not like a Shifcha Kanani, like a non-Jewish slave, when they are freed, they basically go through a conversion process. So if you have a Shifcha or you have a convert and they are married to husbands in their Gentileness or in their slave status, and they are freed or they're converting, Tzarich Lamtin, they have to wait. And even a convert and his wife, they're converting together, mafrishimotam tzadi yom, you actually separate them for 90 days, kedila havchin bin zara hanizra b'kedusha lezara shanizra shelo b'kedusha, to distinguish between a pregnancy that took effect before, that was conceived before the conversion, versus a pregnancy that was conceived after the conversion, because you want to know whether the fetus converted or not only for like all sorts of other like convert status things, but also even for our, I mean, God forbid that it should ever apply, but for our Mishnah's case, where there's a separate category even for the fetus convert as for the just normal convert even. So we really want to know, like, when was this baby, when was this fetus conceived? And this is done even still today, but we don't always make couples live apart for 3 months. That's often, you know, if you have a couple who really want to convert to Judaism, or they need some kind of status upgrade for whatever reason, or they want some kind of status upgrade for whatever reason, it's often, sometimes they'll go to Bati Din, who will tell them that they need to wait 3 months and they need to separate for 3 months before the conversion. And many couples will hear that and be like, oh, this isn't worth it to me. I don't want to be Jewish that badly that I'll live apart from my spouse and my family, and I'll tear apart my family for 3 months. That's way too long of a time. So it's just worth knowing that many Orthodox Bati Din today will accept a pregnancy test in lieu of separating for 3 months, because the whole point of separating for 3 months is only that at the 3 month mark is when it's very obvious whether you're pregnant or not. But nowadays with pregnancy tests, we can do that much earlier, and know whether someone is pregnant or not much quicker, and that is quite standard in many Bati Din now. So if you hear someone saying, "Oh, I wanted to convert, but my Beit Din told me this," tell them to keep shopping around, and they will find a different Beit Din. Okay. Okay, the last thing, 7 minutes, but I'll just show it to you, and if we don't get to it, and then I can go back and I'll try and save some time. I know there are more questions about the conversion stuff and the surrogacy stuff and all that. Okay, so we have this really interesting like wild Mishnah that says a father is not obligated to provide his daughter's sustenance, which is just wild. Like, why would I not have to feed my daughter? Especially because, so Zemidrash Darash Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Lefnei Chachamim b'Karm b'Yavna. This was taught by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah before the sages in the vineyards of Yavna, that we have this principle that the sons inherit and the daughters are sustained from the father's estate. And he says, yeah, ma banim enam yorshim ela lachar mitara, just as the sons, they don't inherit until after the father dies. So too, daughters are not fed out of their father's estate until the father dies. So it comes out that you have this wild idea, which is that fathers do not have to feed their children, which is just seems so crazy. Where just wanted to, like, if you were reading it, you're probably like shocked by that. So I just wanted to bring a little bit of like where the practical halacha stands on that. Here's the Rambam. He says, just as a person is obligated to feed his wife, so you have that same level of obligation to provide sustenance for your children until they are 6, which is really quite young. Like, I'm sure none of you really considered not feeding your 6-year-old and 1-day children. But right, it says the Rambam mikan ve'ilach ma'achilan ad shigdalu ke'takanat chachamim. So there's still a takanat chachamim, even though it's not on a Torah level obligation. It's still ordained by the rabbis that that people need to continue to feed their children at least until they reach majority. And we can, in fact, kind of go after fathers who refuse to do this. So imlo ratzah go arimbo. Machli mimuto, rimbo, he's rebuked, he's embarrassed, appeal should be made to him, and if he still refuses, then we make a public announcement. Omrim pluni achzarihu, this person is cruel, he doesn't want to feed his children, he's worse than an impure bird, who provides for its chicks. But so we still can't, the beating can't like force, can't go into the state and take stuff and give it to his children who are more than 6 years old, but you can embarrass them. And then also, who are we talking about? B'medvrim ramurim be'ish she'ino amud ve'in yodea im ra'ui litin stakao ino ra'ui. So what does this all apply? It applies to a person who is not known to have resources. We don't know whether he's capable or not of giving tzedakah. Aval ima ya'amud she'yesh lo mamon hara'ui litin yimenu tzedakah masapak elahen motzi'ah mimenu ba'al korcho mishum tzedakah v'zani notan ad she'gdilu. But if he has sufficient resources to be obligated in giving tzedakah, then we can go after him on tzedakah obligation grounds, take money from him, and give that tzedakah then to the children. So actually, like maybe like a next level interesting question is, when you are feeding your 6.5-year-old, is that meiser? Are you doing tzedakah? Those are the maybe more like live questions. I hope then, do I need to feed my 6.5-year-old? But can I count it as meiser is a quite interesting question, actually. And just in the last 3 minutes, for people who were interested, like, what does it mean that I'm obligated in feeding them? The Rambam actually spells out, like, really explicitly how much food a person needs minimally, which is so interesting. I will just mention, because it's one of my pet topics, that people who are breastfeeding or pregnant get more, that is something that the Rambam talks about at length. But basically, he says you're supposed to be, or you're allowed to be, vegetarian during the week, but not on Shabbos, which people might also be interested in. And you get kind of a sense of what he thinks food is supposed to be, and it's 2 meals a day most of the week, 3 meals a day on Shabbat. And you're supposed to kind of give your wife some extra money for laundry and cleaning herself and stuff like that once a week. But also, he says, it all depends on your wealth. So that's sort of all a minimum amount for an ani b'Yisrael. But if you're wealthy, then it's all according to your wealth. And if he is capable of providing her with multiple meals of meat every day, then we actually force him to do that, because that's who she thought she was marrying into. So if you, Mr. Man, a wealthy man, are eating like sausage for breakfast and like fancy, I don't know, steak for dinner, and you're giving your wife like half a piece of bread and a vegetable, that's not acceptable, and we actually would force you to give her, and then your children under 6 also, equivalent food to what your wealth can tolerate. But similar on the other end of the spectrum, if someone is extremely impoverished and you can't feed her, even like kind of the basics of bread that he seems to be obligated in, kofi no to lotzi, then actually we just force him to divorce her, and he lives the rest of his life with her, with the debt of her ketubah upon himself, and he has to pay it out whenever he can. So if a husband cannot provide at all for his wife's food, then we don't force her to stay married to him, and he owes her everything he's got, basically, for until his ketubah has been repaid. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. I'm sure people have lots and lots and lots of questions about like the surrogacy stuff. It's a fascinating subject. We just don't have time for it here, but we can definitely come back to that at a different time, or I'm happy to also send people literature. There's a great article by Rav Lichtenstein that is worth everyone's attention.
And if people want that article, where can they reach you?
Sarna at drisha.org.
All right, and thank you to everyone who had questions in chat, whether we had the time to get to them or we didn't. Thank you for listening, and both on Zoom and Facebook. I just want to highlight some upcoming classes. First, our Spring Zman will be starting up again the last week of January, first week of February, and you can sign up for these classes on 5784 at drisha.org/spring, which I'm going to be posting in chat. And I want to highlight a class coming up this Sunday, next in 2 weeks on the 28th is Zichru Torat Moshe, an event and shir in memory of the yortzeit of Rav Moshe Khan. You can also sign up for that on 5784. And if you're interested in recordings of this class or other classes in this series, you can find a recording up in about 5 to 10 minutes on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Drisha Institute, and on our YouTube page in a few weeks. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a good day.